Hello, YouTube. I am Pruitt. And this?
There are those who call me Tim?
And on today's WebDM, we're discussing the race that is not the holiest, but it sure is the horniest. Talking Tieflings, and we're going to make our patrons awfully happy on WebDM. All right, Jim, let's talk about these little hellish bastards.
Yes.
Known as Tieflings.
Known as Tieflings.
What's the deal with these guys, huh? Why do people like them playing them? Just want the anti-hero, what?
It's sort of like with the Dragonborn. There seems to be this trend over the last, say, 15-ish, whatever years. I may blame Warcraft, I may not. Where monstrous type characters as the heroes, as someone that the players sort of take over and use, have become more and more fashionable. Obviously, it's not a new trend, right? Like, there was that second edition book where it was like monstrous humanoids and everything you could play. But Tieflings were introduced in Planescape in second edition.
Yeah.
And they were just sort of like, you had the ancestry of something from the lower planes in you. Like,
stewing around in
somewhere. And it could have been anything from a devil or a demon to a night hag to a Yugoloth to a Hordling or a Deodan or whatever it was. At some point along the way, Wizards of the Coast decided to like unify that and move away from just these are people that have a touch of the lower planes in them to these are a people, the Tieflings are a people that are associated with hell, the nine hells, and specifically Asmodeus, who's sort of the ruler of the nine hells. They switched from the multitudinous, sort of almost like Jim Henson's Muppets style Tieflings that I really love. They're my favorite. Planescape, the aesthetics of it is amazing, but they sort of move away from that to the red and orange skinned curl horns kind of aesthetic in 4th edition. I personally don't care for that. We already have several monstrous sort of player races that are associated with a big bad in the setting, whether it's half-orcs and orcs with Grumsh or Drow and Lolth. It sort of seemed like, does every monstrous-looking humanoid race that's also playable have to be associated with the big bad from D&D lore? But it's working for them. Maybe I'm just out in the cold on this one.
Yeah, so is there going to be like a Beholder type PC race with like an eye?
I don't know. I mean, or maybe like hair with the prehensile hair that moves around with or eyeballs in it.
Or like something more aligned like the Ood.
Right.
Not so assholish, but still tentacly.
Tentacly. So the legacy of 4th edition is that the Tieflings now have this unified theme, the associations of being infernal, of having some sort of connection to Asmodeus, and therefore what was sort of seen as like, okay, Tieflings can't be trusted because of the reputation of their ancestors. That stuff's still there. Like, people still sort of, the mistrust and fear that surround Tieflings is still present in the lore. It's just also been unified with this, the idea that this is one big bad that they. Right.
Yeah, why can't the demons get no love, huh?
Why can't they get any love? Well, of course,
instead of hellish rebuke, they have like gaze of the abyss. Like, something like that.
And they do in a couple of Unearthed Arcana articles, they do sort of branch out and like, okay, what do the abyssal Tieflings look like? There's also feral variants, and then of course there's all the different kinds of things that you can replace their racial features with, including getting wings, which some DMs really don't like.
There was a whole to-do about that at Vigilante. Somebody showed up first off with winged Tieflings, and I'm like, well, I'm playing a samurai then.
Flight is one of those abilities that Dungeon Masters have very strong opinions on, and the consensus does seem to be that it's a very powerful feature that should be dealt with. I kind of see a bunch of flying creatures as alone and vulnerable in the air to more natural flyers who can easily pluck them out and destroy them. Well, yeah. So, that's just how I roll.
Yeah, as a DM, you can offer some negative reinforcement to not fly.
Not fly.
Every time you do, all the archers.
All the archers, like, oh, look at this hovering flying caster with no cover, and
yeah. And I've been learning how to shoot a bow by shooting birds my
entire life. So let's do it this way real quick. So there are variants that way, but each of them still stick around. At least like the feral variant and all the other stuff. There's still sort of that infernal theme going on, with the abyssal tieflings being something different. I like the second edition tieflings in both their appearance and their sort of theme. And to me, in my worlds, I don't go the route that they've done with 4th and 5th edition, which says that tieflings have this unified theme around the 9 hells. Currently, they call the old 2nd edition style tieflings plain touched, and you're just a plain touched race. I am just like, I love Tony DeTurlisi's art. He's the guy that did the all the art for Planescape in 2nd edition and gave it that kind of fairy-like quality to it that I just absolutely love. And so my tieflings are that. I have used in a homebrew a group of sort of a human nation that practiced sorcery and summoning and everything, and I took bits of the Auntie, bits of Tiefling, and kind of created something new with it for my homebrew world, but they're just one nation amongst many, and just one type of Tiefling amongst many for mine. So, but it is one of the several things that I'm just sort of like, I don't really like how they've done it in modern editions. I'll keep to the old ways.
Yeah. Was that 2nd edition or 3rd edition where I played Abaddon?
The Despoiler? That was 2nd
Abaddon
edition.
the Despoiler.
That was 2nd edition.
Yeah. The one time I know that you flubbed.
The one time, that's back when I still flubbed.
Yeah.
I like tieflings. I like the feel of them. I like the idea that in my character's past, someone did something despicable and got some infernal or abyssal or just fiendish blood up in this gene pool.
Yeah.
And generations later, we're still dealing with it. And does the tiefling try to make amends? Do they try to say, I'm going to shed my fiendish ancestry to be kinder, gentler, to overcome those stereotypes that tieflings have to face? Or have they led a life of misery and fear and mistrust because of something they had no control over, and now they're bitter and angry and are like, I'll show you a monster. You guys treated me this way all my life. Well, let's have at it then.
Yes.
In that respect, it offers those multitude of types of characters that you can create just based off the fact that it's like, here's this aspect of this character's personality they had no control over, this fiendish influence. How do they react to that? How do others react to them? And do something different. Maybe it'd be fun to be a tiefling that grew up in a house that was warm and loving and no one judged them, and then they venture out into a wider world and have to deal with the fact that people fear them, think that they're a devil.
Yeah.
And they can't go anywhere. So maybe you have something like that, right? Where you're kind of messing with the themes and everything that characters have.
Well, yeah, because a tiefling growing up in a wholesome home, they wouldn't have those strict walls put in place to protect their delicate sensibilities, and that might break them. You never know.
You never know. It could be, and maybe that's the moment that they choose to go on an adventure as well. It's the first time they step out from that kind of thing. It's worth thinking about for a minute. Like when you're thinking about your tiefling's backstory, what happened to them? It's worth thinking about, like, okay, what kind of fiendish creature are they descended from? Does that influence them in some way? If you're going with the baseline sort of lore, then they're descended from devils. Devils have this reputation for deceit and persuasion and trickery, but also strength. And I mean, there's nobody's saying that like spined devils and chain devils and pit fiends and things are weak by any stretch of the imagination. Do you pick like a specific named, like, no, it's this one? It's that guy right here that I'm descended from. Is it something like a powerful succubus or incubus that periodically goes around corrupting these families with infernal influence, and then coming on later, like in a couple of generations, and grooming those outcasts that have been mistreated and feared and mistrusted without ever revealing that this particular devil, this particular fiend is the one that got them there in the first place. And so you could have a situation where they don't even have to be a warlock, right? They could just be that this fiend seeks them out to be their patron, and only later on is it revealed that they're the one responsible for this condition in the first place.
Yeah, they get to do the I am your great grandfather.
Yeah.
Well, okay, and at that point, like, I'm sitting here thinking, like, that would be an amazing quest to try to remove this curse by trying to kill that blood. Like, well, if a tiefling sought out and found out first the demon that that corrupted their ancestor.
Yeah, yeah.
And they sought it out in an adventure, and in an epic battle on top of a mountain in the 8th layer of hell.
Right.
They smote their foe.
Yeah.
What would you do? Would you have that blood? Would they
it could
stick
be.
with it, or
Right,
could
it
it be
could
a
be.
thing where it gets rid of that tainted blood now that it has been purged from the cosmos?
I absolutely think it's possible, and I think that, you know, if you have a player of a tiefling who wants to do something like that, then you certainly work with them and make it as difficult as you want to. Be like, well, you got to do the ritual, and you can't just slay them, but now you have to like perform this magic that's part time travel, part genealogy sort of spell that courses through all the generations that have ever been touched by this corrupted blood to get rid of it. Kind of like that spell from reference the Dresden Files again, where where he's trying to deal with the vampires once and for all, and sends a spell that affects, if you get the first one, you'll get all of them. That kind of magic is very powerful. It requires being in places of power. It requires objects of power. It requires special material components. Sounds like something that's going to take a whole campaign to flesh out and get through.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a hell of a lot of fun. So let's look at some builds. Tiefling obviously lends itself to Warlock.
Warlock, Sorcerer, and to a lesser extent Wizard are the classes that they seem most drawn to. Their ability scores for the baseline Tiefling, whether it's Charisma and Intelligence, you're looking at them and you're like, yeah, it seems like Caster is the way to go if you're going for one. I think Warlock, maybe more than Sorcerer, is probably the one that fits the most thematically. Obviously, if you're going like Tiefling fiendish Warlock is right there. I've had for a long time I've wanted to play a fiendish Warlock Shadow Sorcerer who is a Tiefling, who's just like, she's a shadow and fire, and she's just dark and hooded and really just leans into the archetype of an infernal, deceitful, using dark magic and summoning devils and other sorts of fiends. And just kind of going with that. But you could do any number of sorceress archetypes. Maybe you seek out a different patron to protect you from the fiend that corrupted your ancestry.
Yeah.
You know? And you'd seek out, say, an archfey, because it's only the fickle and terrible lords of fairy and that are able to protect you from something like a Duke or Duchess of Hell. You have to go to them to save yourself. Or maybe you seek out the assistance of an intelligence from the far realm that's seeking out outcasts, people who've been downtrodden and mistrusted all their lives, to take hold in that mind, in that person that's experienced so much mistrust. Now the great old one has a hook.
Yeah.
And an agent in the world for seeing its plans come to fruition. What if you're a tiefling who's like, you know what, I got this fiendish ancestry, don't want it anymore, I'm totally going to seek out a celestial and make a pact with a celestial and try to overcome my ancestry that way. I could see that being really interesting way to do it.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like, think about it for a minute. They sought out a Solar or something, and
Solar's like, can I help you?
Right, and so you've like kind of reversed it, right? Like, usually the patron is seen as malicious or at least as indifferent, and now you've got a patron who's seen as sort of good and wise and just, putting this tiefling through a test in order to cleanse its soul. And in the meantime, granting a part of their essence so that they can access that kind of divine celestial magic. I think that'd be a really interesting character that's against type as well as playing with it in terms of the mechanics.
Okay, well,
That's just warlocks. Shit.
yeah, that's just warlocks. That doesn't even get into sorcerers, because you can make a hell of a sorcerer.
You make an absolute hell of a sorcerer with a tiefling, not just because they get a bonus to charisma, but they also get that fire resistance if you're playing with the baseline tieflings. If you do get a winged tiefling, it's like, well, now I don't have to worry about that. A lot of sorceress options give you wings. But in this case, there are some out there that don't necessarily. You can have them. Of all of the sorcerers, maybe Shadow, maybe Wild Magic, maybe not. It's one of those things about Wild Magic where if you read the description in the player's handbook, it talks about how this could be anyone who's been exposed to magic. It doesn't have to be necessarily specifically like chaotic sort of magic. It could be sort of a generic, anyone exposed to it. That's the way I would go with it if I was going a wild magic tiefling sorcerer. But I think maybe shadow fits best, or I don't know, any of the others really.
Yeah, no, it fits pretty well. Now, when going against type for a tiefling, I mean, there's some room to work with there.
There's a lot of room to work with, I think. I think one of the things that would be a fun exercise for me if I was making a tiefling is to think of all of the archetypes that Aasimar fit into. And then replacing them and going like, yeah, this is a plain touched person who has connections with the outer realms, and in particular, specifically like the lower planes of where the demons and devils and other fiends live. What if I went paladin with this guy? And much in the same way of a tiefling celestial warlock, this is a tiefling paladin who is seeking to redeem themselves, seeking to do everything they can to cast off the influence of the fiendish forces in their life, to guard their mind and their soul against corruption. And they've sworn an oath of devotion to uphold lawfulness and good, and protect the realm and serve the king and country and blah 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 blah, whatever you need.
Right.
Or a tiefling paladin of conquest who leans into the Hell Knight archetype and sort of thematic focus there, and is just they are there as a vanguard for fiendish forces should the need arise. And until then, they're just there to perfect their own selves, so they're fit for domination.
Yeah, they're a forward scout of the Blood War.
Yeah, a forward scout of the Blood War, or a deserter from the Blood War, or maybe not deserter, but just like they were cut off from their unit, right? They got hurtled through a random portal somewhere in the abyss. They were invading. Now they're cut off. They're random, and now they're spit out on some prime material world. And it's like,
backwater.
How do I get back?
Hey, I need to summon a certain devil. Can you help me? Because I gotta get home.
That may be more appropriate for a villain of a campaign, but it could also work for a player where you don't even necessarily have to be like a paladin of conquest. You could just be a tiefling who was a part of a blood war regiment, and they got lost, they got cut off, and here they are, and they're like, I don't know anything about this place. It doesn't rain acid. The ground doesn't randomly shoot fire. There's no trees made of living snakes trying to eat me.
So what you're saying is there's nothing to do on a Saturday night.
There's nothing to do on a Saturday other than get in trouble. And plus all the sort of shenanigans that being a deserted soldier would bring you. And, the devils don't really care how you got separated from your unit. They're still going to punish you. Right.
Yeah, you're
a deserter regardless of how it happened.
I mean, especially if we're talking about, hell.
Yeah.
I mean, it's clearly written in your contract
you have to do that.
Yes, when you were conscripted into the Blood War army, you probably didn't see it because it was on the fine print in an extra dimensional space between the front and the back half of the pages.
You didn't have a tesseracted reading glass that would reveal the fourth dimensional pages that you needed to. Yeah, absolutely. The pages that hadn't yet been written when you signed the contract. There's other things you could do. A rogue tiefling is another one of those where you're maybe engaged in nefarious acts and just sort of criminal activities. And what else is an outcast who's been feared and mistrusted all their life supposed to get up to other than gravitate towards the more roguish or criminal pursuits? And
also there's a bit of attraction with the dangerous elements, so Bard works.
Bard works, sure.
And the charisma does help.
Absolutely.
If you want to be the face of the party.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a contradiction considering how tieflings are portrayed and reacted to.
Yeah, but it's that, but it's also like the bard with their deceit and their persuasion, their use of illusions and enchantments fits very well with a type of devil as the deceitful one, the tempter, and the corrupter. So maybe you're like a bard college of whispers or something like that seeking to gain influence and power in the courts of the setting, and eventually become the vanguard for demonic influence or devilish influence or something. What do you think about a tiefling druid? How would you go about doing a tiefling druid?
I've never actually thought about that. Think about it like, what if like a demon or devil corrupted like a satyr or something like that,
Okay. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, man. Like, like literally tiefling druid. It sounds like an oxymoron or something.
does,
I've never
doesn't it? But
like
it's like-
actually thought about.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever heard of or encountered anyone who's like, I really want to play a tiefling druid, but it's a possibility. You could do it. It's not forbidden.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what are the ways? Do you continue with like the theme of redemption from a fiendish influence? Maybe instead of seeking out that redemption in the celestial world, in the realm of gods and goodness, you go the more like natural route, and you're like, hey, I want out of this whole good and evil, planar, cosmic conflict that's going on here.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna like find my inner peace under an oak tree and commune with nature, kind of thing.
Well, see, now I can see that. I can see it like a hippie tiefling.
Yeah, yeah.
With he's got his dreads, even though you probably shouldn't have dreads. It's like,
Dreads
just wash
and
your
horns.
fucking
He's
hair.
got horns and the dreads. It seems like too much.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
too much. But he's got different shit hanging off of his horns.
Sure.
He's got all of his charms and his whatever,
Absolutely.
his chakra stones.
Yeah.
For his natural healing,
Yeah, absolutely.
and his deodorant stone that he carries around in his
He
tiara.
sticks under his arm.
Yeah, he sticks
Yeah.
under his arm, and it really works. The party loves that.
They really love that. But it's the same with like Tiefling Rangers, Tiefling Monks. I mean, those are the kinds of class combos that I think, if you showed up with them in some groups, they're just gonna be like, please don't. I hear about groups all the time where they get judgmental about the sort of class race combos that get brought to the table. And I know that there are some groups who like really have optimized combats. And if you're not pulling your weight, then that's a problem for them. But I think it's limiting, and there's other things you can do with you don't have to always be optimized for combat. There's other things you can do. So I think of like a Tiefling Ranger as fitting in that category of an interesting character, but maybe not one that's the most optimized. You could do like a Tiefling Horizon Walker. Right? Who would know better about planar stuff than someone touched by the planes?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
He carries the knowledge within him. He just feels it. He just knows.
Yep. Because I like the second edition sort of weird style. It's one of those character races where it's like, I don't care what you say you look like. Like the others, it's like kind of like keep it within these bounds or anything.
Yeah, you need the horns, the tail, the coloring.
The horns, the tail. I think we've had tieflings who are like purple with butterfly wings. We've had ones that have ridiculous eye colors and hair going on. Ones with goat legs. Ones with reptile claws, and some that have been covered in spikes. And if you accept that this is a race that any number of horrific creatures have corrupted their ancestors at some point, or got them, or made a bargain with them, or whatever it was, then you can really just kind of go nuts.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, my tiefling has like 8 eyes, and that's reflected in the fact that they're proficient in perception.
Yeah.
I am, and find ways to see those sort of cosmetic elements that you're bringing in reinforced with mechanics is a way to do that.
Yeah. Now I'm trying to imagine what a tiefling of like a chain devil would look like.
Oh man.
Like, would he look like he had chainmail on, except he doesn't wear armor? I mean,
I don't know enough about chain devils to know. I know that at one point, we're going to get off on a bit of a tangent here, folks. But I know at one point that chain devils were not chain devils. They were chitons who just happened to live in Beator with the Batari.
Yeah.
Or the Badazu, sorry. But that was in second edition. And then at some point, they just were like, yeah, they're in hell with the other devils. Let's just call them a devil,
Yeah.
I think that's where they got eventually with 5th edition. So I don't really know how I had always thought that the chain devils, it was more the chain, and the person wrapped up in the chain was maybe not as willing. That's how I've always seen it myself.
Maybe they could cast like Thorn Whip, except chain whip.
It's like a chain whip, like it just summons a chain.
That's
not a bad idea.
As an at will
I kind of like
cantrip.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's think for a minute. Yes. So, I suppose there are groups out there who wouldn't like tieflings because of that infernal influence, and they might say like, yeah, we don't want them at the party because these are kind of, demonic and devilish, that kind of thing. At the same time, the fact that tieflings are a playable race in the player's handbook is indicative that we've moved well beyond the years of any kind of satanic panic or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's just like they don't care. It's just like, yeah, this demonic creature with horns and red skin is, you can make one right now. You can have it worship a devil and gain some power from that.
Yeah. And it casts Hellish Rebuke.
And casts Hellish Rebuke. So I suppose in that sense, it's good to see the inclusion of things like that, because it means that the people at Wizards feel like they can flex their creative muscle and not have to abide by the moral codes that once guided the hobby so long ago.
Yeah, and, freedom of thought and expression.
Sure.
What's more American?
Well, I mean, guns for one.
Oh, God. Next on WebDM, guns.
Next on WebDM, we discuss the gun debate.